Listen, the greatest tragedy that can befall the human heart, not betrayal, not loss, not even death itself, but this, to be punished for sins you never committed, to watch innocence burn while guilt walks free. This is the story of Aduni, whose only crime was loving too deeply, and whose punishment came wrapped in silver and righteousness. Some say the thunder god, Sango, is just. Others whisper that justice and truth are not always the same thing. By the time this tale is told, you will know which voice speaks wisdom. In the bustling city of Badan, where ancient traditions wrestled daily with modern ambitions, lived the most celebrated couple of their generation. Dr. Adebayo Gundimu, a renowned surgeon whose hands could coax life back from death's very threshold, and his wife, Aduni, a literature professor whose beauty was matched only by her brilliant mind. Their love story was the stuff of legend, childhood sweethearts who had found each other again after years of separate education abroad, their reunion orchestrated by fate at a medical conference in London. When Adebayo saw Aduni across that crowded lecture hall, delivering a paper on post-colonial identity in contemporary African literature, time itself seemed to pause. "Aduni?" His voice carried across the years like a prayer answered. She looked up from her notes, and her smile could have powered the entire city of Lagos. "Bayo. My God, Bayo, is it really you?" Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discourse and rediscovered intimacy. He would call her between surgeries, sometimes at 3 a.m., just to hear her voice analyzing Achebe or discussing the philosophical implications of Soyinka's latest work. She would surprise him at the hospital with home-cooked meals that tasted like childhood and love combined. When they married in a ceremony that blended traditional Yoruba rites with modern elegance, the entire community celebrated. Here was proof that education and tradition could dance together, that love could transcend time and distance, that happily ever after was more than just a fairy tale ending. But fairy tales, as any student of literature knows, often hide darker truths beneath their golden surfaces. What the celebrating guests didn't know, what Aduni herself didn't know, was that her perfect husband carried a secret that would eventually destroy them both. Adebayo was not the faithful, devoted man he appeared to be. His frequent medical conferences were elaborate covers for affairs with nurses, fellow doctors, and any woman who caught his sophisticated eye. He was careful, meticulous even. He chose partners who understood discretion, who wanted nothing more than the excitement of sleeping with the famous Dr. Adebayo Gundimu. He covered his tracks with the same precision he used in surgery, leaving no evidence, arousing no suspicion. Aduni, brilliant as she was, saw only what she wanted to see. Her husband's late nights were dedication to his patients. His weekend trips were professional obligations. His distracted air when he returned from conferences was exhaustion from saving lives and advancing medical knowledge. "You work too hard, my love," she would say, massaging his shoulders as he sat at their kitchen table, supposedly reviewing medical journals but actually deleting text messages from his latest conquest. "Someone has to," he would reply, leaning into her touch while his mind wandered to plans for his next rendezvous. "The price of excellence is eternal vigilance." She believed him because she loved him, and love, as any poet will tell you, is the most exquisite form of blindness. But Adebayo's mother, Mama Kemi, was not blinded by love. She was blinded by something far more dangerous. The certainty that she knew her son better than anyone else ever could. Mama Kemi had watched her son's marriage with the sharp eyes of a woman who had survived 40 years of her own husband's infidelities. She recognized the signs, the guilty gifts, the overcompensating affection. The way Adebayo's eyes never quite met his wife's when he spoke of his travels. But where another woman might have warned Aduni, might have opened her daughter-in-law's eyes to the truth, Mama Kemi chose a different path. In her twisted logic, the problem wasn't her son's behavior. It was Aduni's naivety. If only the girl were more vigilant, more suspicious, she would keep her husband in line. A woman who doesn't watch her husband closely, Mama Kemi would mutter to her reflection as she prepared for market each morning, deserves whatever befalls her marriage. The idea came to her slowly, like poison seeping through cracks in a foundation. Magun, the ancient protection, the thunder god's justice. If she could make Aduni more careful, more aware of the consequences of unfaithfulness, surely the girl would work harder to keep Adebayo satisfied at home. It was for the marriage, she told herself, for her grandchildren-to-be, for the family honor. The medicine man she visited in the shadowy corners of Bodija Market asked no questions when she described what she wanted. A protective charm, she said, to keep my daughter-in-law faithful while my son travels. Magun is not a game, Mama, the old man warned, his hands already reaching for his various potions and powders. The thunder speaks only truth. It does not distinguish between guilt and appearance of guilt. My daughter-in-law is a good girl, Mama Kemi replied, pressing Naira notes into his weathered palm. She has nothing to fear from truth. But truth, as Aduni would soon learn, is not always what it appears to be. The ring came disguised as a peace offering. Mama Kemi and Aduni had been having subtle tensions. Nothing dramatic, just the natural friction between a protective mother and a beloved daughter-in-law. So when the older woman arrived at their Bodija home with a beautiful silver ring, Aduni saw it as an olive branch. It belonged to my grandmother. Mama Kemi lied smoothly, pressing the ring into Aduni's palm. She wore it for 60 years of marriage, through joy and sorrow, plenty and want. I want you to have it. The ring was exquisite, intricate silverwork that seemed to catch and hold light in impossible ways. When Aduni slipped it onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. Mama, it's beautiful, but are you sure? Something so precious should stay in the family. You are family, my daughter. Besides, Mama Kimi's smile was warm with false sincerity. It will protect you. My grandmother always said it kept her faithful to one man, and one man faithful to her. If only she had listened more carefully to her own words. That night, as Aduni admired the ring by lamplight, she felt a strange chill run through her. For just a moment, the silver seemed to pulse with its own internal fire, and she could swear she heard the distant rumble of thunder. But it was dry season. There were no clouds in the sky. Dr. Adebayo Gundimu noticed the ring immediately when he returned from his latest conference, this time in Port Harcourt, where he'd spent 3 days with a pharmaceutical sales representative who had caught his eye at a medical expo. New jewelry? He asked, taking his wife's hand and examining the intricate silverwork. Your mother gave it to me. It was your great-grandmother's. A shadow passed across Adebayo's face, some flicker of recognition or unease that Aduni was too happy to notice. He had grown up hearing whispers about his great-grandmother, about the strange power she'd held over his great-grandfather, about the way other women in the village had feared to even speak to the old man. But those were just stories, superstition, the kind of backward thinking that education was supposed to eliminate. Still, that night he made love to his wife with unusual intensity, as if trying to imprint himself upon her soul. And when she cried out his name in passion, he found himself listening for sounds that should not exist, the rumble of thunder, the whisper of ancestral judgment. But there was only silence and the familiar sounds of their love. For now, Dr. Emeka Chukwu arrived at the University of Ibadan's literature department like a breath of fresh intellectual air, young, brilliant, and passionate about post-colonial African literature. He was everything Aduni's colleagues had hoped for in their new visiting professor from Oxford. More than that, he was everything Aduni had been missing in her increasingly distant husband, someone who understood her work, who could engage with her ideas, who listened when she spoke about the intersection of traditional oral narratives and modern written forms. Their friendship began innocently enough, professional consultations that stretched into long conversations over coffee, collaborative research sessions that evolved into shared lunches, academic conferences where they found themselves talking late into the evening about literature, philosophy, and the complex dance between tradition and modernity in contemporary African society. Aduni had forgotten what it felt like to be truly heard, truly understood. With Dr. Emeka Chukwu, she could discuss her theories about the feminist undertones in traditional Yoruba praise poetry without seeing his eyes glaze over. She could debate the political implications of language choice in contemporary Nigerian novels without having to explain every cultural reference. "You have a brilliant mind," Emeka told her one afternoon as they sat in her office, reviewing drafts of a joint paper they were writing. "Adebayo is lucky to have found someone who can match his intellectual depth." If only he knew, Aduni thought but didn't say, that her husband's idea of deep conversation lately consisted of complaints about hospital politics and requests for her to manage social obligations. He was too busy to handle personally. "We're both busy people," she said instead, deflecting from the growing distance in her marriage. "Success requires sacrifice." "But not the sacrifice of one's essential self," Emeka replied, his dark eyes serious. "A marriage should nurture who you are, not require you to become less than you could be." His words hit her like lightning, not because they were romantic, but because they were true. When had she last felt intellectually challenged at home? When had Adebayo last asked about her research, her dreams, her thoughts on anything beyond domestic arrangements? It was a dangerous realization, made more dangerous by the fact that she shared it with a man who looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. The evening of the departmental reception was supposed to be a triumph for Aduni. She was presenting her groundbreaking research on the evolution of Yoruba folktales in contemporary literature, work that had already attracted international attention and promises of publication from prestigious journals. Adebayo had promised to attend, to stand beside her as she received recognition from her peers. But at the last minute, he called with apologies. An emergency surgery, a life hanging in the balance, the familiar refrain of a man whose work always took precedence over his wife's achievements. "I'm so sorry, my love." His voice crackled through the phone connection. "Dr. Williams will cover for me at the reception. Give my regards to everyone." Aduni stared at her reflection in their bedroom mirror, seeing a woman dressed for celebration who suddenly felt utterly alone. The ring on her finger seemed heavier than usual, its silver surface reflecting her disappointed face in miniature. She almost didn't go. Almost called Emeka to cancel, to make excuses about being unwell. But her research deserved its moment. Her work mattered, even if her husband couldn't be bothered to witness its recognition. The reception was everything she'd hoped it would be. Colleagues praising her insights, international visitors expressing interest in collaboration, department heads hinting at promotion possibilities. For 3 hours, she felt valued, celebrated, intellectually alive. And through it all, Dr. Emeka Chukwu was there, not as a date, not as anything more than a supportive colleague, but as someone who understood the significance of her achievement, who celebrated her success as if it were his own. When the reception ended and they found themselves walking together across the university campus, the conversation flowing as naturally as it always did, Aduni felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Thank you," she said, as they paused beneath the ancient flame tree that had witnessed countless academic celebrations. "For being here tonight, for understanding why this mattered. Your work is extraordinary, Aduni. It deserves to be celebrated." In the moonlight, with the success of the evening still glowing in her heart, with months of intellectual isolation finally broken by genuine connection, she looked at this man who saw her, truly saw her, and felt something shift in her chest. When he kissed her, it was like coming home to a part of herself she'd forgotten existed. But as their lips met beneath the flame tree, as her arms wound around his neck and his hands tangled in her hair, the ring on her finger began to burn with cold fire. And somewhere in the cloudless sky, thunder began to rumble. Emeka's death was violent and immediate. One moment he was holding her, whispering words of love and admiration against her lips. The next he was convulsing in her arms, his body arcing with supernatural electricity, his eyes rolling back to show only white. "Emeka!" Aduni screamed, trying to hold him, to somehow anchor his soul to his body through sheer force of will. "Emeka, stay with me!" But the Thunder God's justice knows no mercy, recognizes no degrees of guilt. As far as the ancient magic was concerned, adultery was adultery, sin was sin, punishment was swift and absolute. Emeka died in her arms, his last breath carrying her name like a prayer that would never be answered, and as his body went still, as the supernatural lightning that had claimed him faded back into whatever realm such justice comes from, Aduni understood with horrible clarity what had been done to her. The ring. The beautiful, protective ring from her mother-in-law. Not a blessing, but a curse. Not protection against infidelity, but punishment for it. Swift, terrible, and utterly without distinction between the guilty and the innocent. She looked down at the silver band that had seemed so beautiful, so meaningful, and saw it for what it truly was. A weapon, a trap, a judgment passed by those too blind to see where the real guilt lay. The police came, of course. A prominent professor found dead on university grounds couldn't be ignored, even when the official cause appeared to be an undiagnosed heart condition that had chosen the worst possible moment to manifest. But Aduni knew the truth, and as she sat in the police station, answering questions about her purely professional relationship with the deceased, the weight of that truth threatened to crush her soul. It was there, in that sterile room, with fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and unforgiving, that her phone rang with the call that would complete her destruction. "Mrs. Waragundimu?" The voice was young, female, uncertain. "My name is Blessing. I think you should know about your husband." The words that followed fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of revelation through Aduni's shattered world.